A house that rises 3% in value can make its owner a 15% return in the first year. That sounds impossible. It's also the reason the real estate versus stocks debate is so often explained badly. Imagine a $400,000 home with an $80,000 down payment. If the home rises 3%, that's a $12,000 gain. $12,000 is 15% of the buyer's original $80,000. That's leverage. The owner receives the price change on the entire house, not just the cash they put down. So does that mean a home growing at 3% beats a stock portfolio growing at 8%? Not necessarily, because the mortgage has interest. The house has taxes, insurance, repairs, and transaction costs, and the renter gets to invest the down payment. We're going to run both choices for 20 years using the same starting cash and the same monthly household budget. Then we'll change just one assumption at a time. And that's where the answer gets much more interesting than buying is always better or stocks always win. First, we need to fix the comparison. A house is doing two jobs. It's an asset, but it's also a place to live. Stocks only do the first job. If we compare the return on a house with the return on an index fund and ignore the housing service, we're not comparing the same thing. But rent isn't wasted money. Rent buys a place to live. It also pays someone else to absorb repair risk, transaction risk, and the risk that the property falls in value just when you need to move. Homeowners also spend money they never get back. Mortgage interest doesn't become equity. Neither do property taxes, homeowners insurance, routine maintenance, or the cost of selling. Principal is different. When part of your mortgage payment reduces the loan balance, that money moves from your checking account into home equity. It's not a return, it's savings. That distinction is the first big payoff. Don't compare rent with the entire mortgage payment. Compare rent with the owner's unrecoverable costs and track mortgage principal as wealth. If this was helpful, subscribe for more practical videos about personal and family finance, and send this one to someone who might find it useful too. Now let's give two households the same choice. The home costs $400,000. The buyer puts 20% down, or $80,000. We'll assume another 3% of the price, or $12,000, in buyer closing costs. That's within the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's typical range of 2 to 5%, although the real number varies. So both households begin with $92,000 available. The buyer uses it for the down payment and closing. The renter invests the full $92,000 in a low-cost stock portfolio. The mortgage is $320,000 for 30 years at 6.49%. That rate matches Freddie Mac's national weekly average reported for July 9, 2026. It is not a quote that every borrower would receive, but it gives us a current benchmark. The principal and interest payment is about $2,021 a month. Then we add the ownership costs the mortgage statement hides. We'll assume property tax equal to 1.1% of the home's value each year. Homeowners insurance equal to 0.5%, and maintenance equal to 1%. Those are modeling assumptions, not universal facts. A new condo in one state and an old detached house near the coast could have wildly different bills. We're also leaving out homeowners association fees, major renovations, utilities, and tax deductions so the example stays understandable. The comparable rental starts at $2,200 a month. Rent rises 3% a year. The home also rises 3% a year. The stock portfolio returns 8% a year, including dividends. Again, those are assumptions, not predictions. Historical stock data from New York University's Aswath Damodaran includes dividends, which matters because comparing a house with a price-only stock index would quietly shortchange stocks. Every month, the renter invests the difference between the owner's total modeled housing outflow and the rent. If rent eventually becomes more expensive, that reduces the renter's contribution. Both households are therefore using the same monthly budget, and at the end of 20 years, both sell. We assume the homeowner loses 6% of the sale price to selling friction. That 6% is only an assumption because commissions and other costs vary and can be negotiated. For the renter, we look at the portfolio balance before any personal tax effect. Here's what happens. At 3% annual appreciation, the $400,000 house grows to about $722,000. After 20 years of mortgage payments, the owner still owes about $178,000. That surprises people, but a 30-year mortgage amortizes slowly, especially at a rate near 6.5%. After subtracting the loan and our assumed selling costs, the homeowner walks away with about $501,000 in equity. That is real wealth. It came from the down payment, 20 years of principal payments, home appreciation, and leverage. What about the renter? The original $92,000 compounded in stocks. The monthly cost differences were invested too. After 20 years, the renter's portfolio is about $621,000. In this baseline, renting and investing finishes ahead by roughly $120,000. So stocks win. Case closed, right? No, because the most useful part of this calculation isn't the winner. It's how easily the winner changes. Keep every housing assumption exactly the same. Same house, same mortgage, same rent, same maintenance, same 20 years. But instead of stocks earning 8%, assume they earn 6%. The renter's ending portfolio falls from about $621,000 to about $435,000. The homeowner still has about $501,000. Now the homeowner wins by roughly $67,000. We changed one number by 2 percentage points, and the verdict moved by nearly $187,000. That is the real math of long-term compounding. Small changes don't stay small when they touch large balances for 2 decades. Now, reset stocks to 8% and increase home appreciation from 3% to 4%. The home grows to roughly $876,000. After the mortgage and selling costs, owner equity is about $646,000. The renter's portfolio also rises slightly to about $675,000 because our model makes property taxes, insurance, and maintenance grow with the home's value. Those higher ownership costs create more money for the renter to invest. Stocks still finish ahead, but now by only about $29,000. Over 20 years, that is close enough that a different tax situation, one expensive repair, a lower selling cost, or a slightly different rent could erase the gap. This is why a single historical average cannot answer a personal rent versus buy decision. The Federal Housing Finance Agency reported that national house prices rose only 1.8% from the fourth quarter of 2024 to the fourth quarter of 2025. But it also reported large differences across states. Your house is not the national index. It's one property in one neighborhood exposed to one local economy. Your stock portfolio can own hundreds or thousands of companies. Your home may represent most of your net worth at one street address. That concentration is a risk, but it can also be a kind of protection because the home's value and your need for housing are linked. If local housing becomes more expensive, an owner already owns local housing. There's also a tax difference. Under current Internal Revenue Service rules, a qualifying seller may exclude up to $250,000 of gain on a main home or up to $500,000 for many married couples filing jointly. Ownership and use tests apply. Stock gains depend on the account and the investor's tax situation. A retirement account, taxable brokerage account, and health savings account are not interchangeable. Our baseline leaves taxes out because pretending one tax rule fits every household would create false precision. But in a real decision, account type and eligibility can absolutely move the answer. Time may move it even more. If you buy and sell after 3 years, closing costs and selling friction are spread across a very short period. You may have paid down little principal. A job transfer or family change can force the sale during a weak local market. Short ownership periods make the house's large transaction costs dangerous. Hold the same home for 20 or 30 years, and those one-time costs are spread much more thinly. The fixed principal and interest payment also becomes easier to carry as wages and prices rise, although taxes, insurance, and maintenance can keep climbing. At the end of 30 years, the mortgage disappears. Rent usually doesn't. But the paid-off home is not free. It still requires taxes, insurance, repairs, and a large amount of capital tied up in the property. That tied-up equity has an opportunity cost. A paid-off $500,000 home is still $500,000 that could have been invested somewhere else. That doesn't mean you should borrow against it. It means no mortgage payment and no economic cost are not the same statement. Now we get to the factor spreadsheets handle badly: human behavior. The renter in our example is almost perfect. On day one, they invest all $92,000. Every month after that, they calculate the exact cost difference and invest it. When stocks fall, they don't panic. When the portfolio rises, they don't raid it for a vacation or a car. They keep going for 20 years. Real people often don't do that. The homeowner's mortgage, meanwhile, collects principal automatically. The owner may never think, "I'm investing this month." The payment happens, the loan balance falls, and equity accumulates. That is why the better pure investment can lose to the better savings system. But forced savings has a downside. Home equity is not an emergency fund. Accessing it may require a loan, fees, underwriting, and monthly payments. If income disappears during a recession, the mortgage still arrives. Leverage magnifies gains, but it also magnifies losses. Suppose the $400,000 home falls 10% shortly after purchase. That's a $40,000 decline, half of the original down payment, before selling costs. Stocks can fall faster and more visibly, but a homeowner who must sell has fewer ways to reduce the damage. Liquidity creates temptation, while illiquidity creates constraint. Neither is automatically good. The right structure depends partly on which mistake you are more likely to make. So how should you run this decision without building a giant spreadsheet? Use 5 numbers. Number 1 is your expected holding period. If there is a serious chance you'll move within 5 years, treat that as a major warning for buying. The exact break-even point varies, but transaction costs need time. Number 2 is the local price of a home compared with the rent on a genuinely comparable home. Not a studio apartment versus a 4-bedroom house. Compare the same location, space, quality, and lifestyle as closely as possible. Number 3 is the complete unrecoverable owner cost. Include mortgage interest, property tax, insurance, maintenance, homeowners association fees, purchase costs, and eventual selling costs. Keep principal separate because it becomes equity. Number 4 is the actual amount you will invest if you rent, not the theoretical difference, the amount that will leave your checking account automatically every month. If the answer is 0, don't give the renting scenario credit for imaginary investing. Number 5 is staying power. Could you keep paying the mortgage through a job loss? Could you keep holding stocks through a 40% decline? Do you have cash reserves after the down payment? A plan with a slightly higher expected return can still be worse if one bad year forces you out. Then run ranges instead of forecasts. Try home appreciation at 2, 3, and 4%. Try stock returns at 6, 8, and 10%. Try higher insurance. Try a major repair. Try moving in 7 years instead of 20. You're not looking for the scenario that confirms what you already want. You're looking for the assumptions that flip the answer. If buying only wins when the home appreciates rapidly, nothing breaks, and you never move, the plan is fragile. If renting only wins because you assume a very high stock return and flawless investing discipline, that plan is fragile too. And remember that this is not purely a money decision. A home can give a family control, stability, room to change the space, and protection from a landlord ending the lease. Renting can give flexibility, simpler maintenance, and the freedom to move for a better job. Those benefits are real even when they don't appear in ending net worth. The mistake is not valuing them. The mistake is pretending they are investment returns. So which one will make you more money? As a pure, liquid, diversified compounding asset, stocks have the cleaner case. They have no roof to replace, no local property tax, and no 6-figure exposure to one neighborhood. But a sensibly priced home held for a long time can make a household richer than the renter and investor alternative. It uses leverage, replaces rent, may receive favorable tax treatment, and turns a monthly payment into forced principal savings. In our current rate baseline, the disciplined renter finishes ahead. Change the stock return from 8% to 6% and the homeowner finishes ahead. Change the location, rent, insurance, taxes, holding period, or behavior, and the answer can move again. The honest winner is not real estate or stocks. It's the plan whose assumptions still work when the future is merely ordinary, and the plan you can fund, survive, and follow for decades. Thanks for watching. See you next time.